In this video, I will talk about the first operational phase of the battle for Pokrovsk. In this phase, practically in the first 2 months of 2025, the Russians tried to encircle the strategically important town of Pokrovsk. They advanced significantly, but later they met with well-coordinated Ukrainian counterattacks executed in a new fashion. In this video, I will describe the operations themselves and dig a bit deeper in these Ukrainian counterattacks in order to present why I said that they are in a new fashion. If you think my job worth it, please don't hesitate to give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you have anything to add, I am more than happy to see it in the comments. And now, let's start. Pokrovsk has its strategic importance because this is practically the last major road junction and the last bastion in the center of the Donbass. Behind Pokrovsk, there is a large empty steppe in which it is more difficult to fight a defensive battle. Albeit not impossible, but in order to do so, the Ukrainians should erect colossal defensive fortifications, just like the Russians did in spring and summer 2023 in the southern Zaporizhia region. From the east, interestingly, the Russians did not even try to launch an attack. From one side, it is understandable, because in this direction they should have overcome relatively large built-up areas, and their freedom of maneuver would have been seriously hampered by narrow passes between small lakes and reservoirs. While from the west, they had to overcome only minor creeks as water obstacles and some very small villages to reach the railway berm behind which only the usual tree lines could form minor obstacles up until the main supply route. The other reason is quite hard to believe, but if we observe the facts, it is true. The Russians attacked on only at the western flank because they only had enough force for one operational axis. Therefore, both the terrain and the resource constraints forced the Russians to attack towards Kotlyne, trying to encircle Pokrovsk from the west. So, back to the operations. On the Russian side, the 27th Motorized Rifle Division and the 90th Guards Tank Division were responsible for running the tactical and operational level attacks. These operational level organizations, I mean the two divisions, could easily coordinate the attacks of the brigades, while on the Ukrainian side a diverse patchwork of forces were present with dubious level of coordination. This higher level of coordination on the Russian side very much made its presence felt throughout the whole January. On the 1st of January, the Russians sent one assault group towards Piszczanie. The green line represents the boundary of the area of influence of this attack. Knowing the tried and tested balance-shifting method of the Russians, it is no surprise that the Russians sent another two assault groups here, and they captured the last terrain obstacle before the railway berm. On the 2nd of January, the Russians continued their balance-shifting method. If we closely observe the Russian attacks on the 1st, I can draw the area of influence of these attacks with the green line. Surprise, surprise, the Russians attacked towards the village of Salonye on the 2nd and managed to push the Ukrainians out from the village. On the 3rd and 5th of January, the Russians attacked towards Piszczanie again, thus perfectly shifting their center of gravity, further disrupting the Ukrainian defenses in this sector. Between the 6th and 9th of January, in spite of the repeated attack waves, the Russians did not achieve any success on their main axis of attack. This could be the result of the 414th Drone Brigade. The famous Magyar's bird had started operating in this area. However, the Russians managed to advance a bit in the village of Uspanivka, capturing half of the village and large chunk of fields south of it. On the 10th of January, bad weather hampered the Ukrainian drones, while in the same time it seems that the Russian reinforcements had arrived, because they launched intensive attacks both in the sector of Salonye and Piszczanie. The Russians fought hard and managed to advance through a wide front, but later it turned out to be only a shaping operation. On the 12th of January, the Russians executed their main attack. Infantry assault groups of the 35th Motor Rifle Brigade and the 1477th Motorized Rifle Regiment advanced along a 4-kilometer wide front and successfully reached the railway berm between Udachnye and Kotlyne. This was a serious problem, because these two small villages and the small industrial area between them were the last defendable line before the Russians could break through towards north. On the 13th of January, the Russians strengthened their positions by widening their penetration, but on the 14th they could not advance further, which is understandable, because after these significant advances the Russians had to reorganize their forces, execute the planning and preparations before their next attacks. And of course the Ukrainian drone strikes had made their presence felt. But on the 15th, the Russians achieved another tactical level success by advancing at the right flank of Katline and capturing half of the village. The Russians were one step away from a breakthrough. I mean a real one, not the one about which you can read in the mainstream media almost every day. However, quite interestingly, contrary to their usual SOP, the Russians did not push for a complete breakthrough near Katline, and it can have two reasons. One, they did not have enough troops to do so. Two, they did not have adequate supply routes, therefore they had to widen their bulge before going for a breakthrough. I assume both two reasons are true, but what is more important, the Russian divisional headquarters saw it the same way. Thus, they launched their usual infantry assault groups against Piszczanie on the 16th and managed to advance to the next tree line. On the 17th and 18th, the Russians, strictly following their balance-shifting attack method, deployed a whole assault company in order to capture Kotlina, but they failed. Mainly thanks to the seemingly most valuable element of the ill-fated Ukrainian 155th Mechanized Infantry Brigade, the French Caesar batteries, which fired barrage after barrage, and after 24 hours of intense combat, they managed to temporarily halt the advance of the Russian 35th Motor Rifle Brigade. Ladies and gentlemen, based on open sources, I assume this is the first ever successful operation of this brigade. On the 20th, the Ukrainians mounted a counterattack, seemingly trying to exploit the previous day's minor successes, but they got beaten back by Russian drones and infantry. To make matters worse, a whole assault company of the Russian 1437th Motorized Rifle Regiment launched a well-coordinated and powerful attack south of the previous day's Ukrainian counterattack, and they managed to capture 4 square kilometers. On the following 3 days, the Russians only executed very small infantry attacks, widening the gap and maintaining the pressure on the Ukrainian lines. It is clear that they were in a shaping phase of another decisive attack. This operation came as scheduled. On the 25th, they launched powerful attacks through the whole 2-kilometer wide sector between Udachnye and Katline, but they achieved some success only in the center and captured the small industrial complex between the two villages. It seems that the Ukrainians managed to contain the Russian advance mainly due to the above-mentioned artillery. Furthermore, the drones and incoming reinforcements seemed to make their presence felt, but in spite of this, the Ukrainian situation was slowly but surely deteriorating. The situation was desperate on both sides. The balance of the Ukrainian defense was hanging on a thread, and the Russians knew it. However, the Russians themselves were facing even more difficult challenges. As always, these challenges had a lot to do with logistics system. In order to understand it, we have to have a closer look on the terrain. The Russian bulge could be supplied via this main supply route from the direction of Selidove. This main supply route forks into two directions in the village of Novotroitske. From this point, it is getting really challenging. In the tip of the bulge, where the main Russian attack axis can be found, these supply routes run so close to the front that they can be easily hit by the Ukrainian drone units or even by mortars executing hit-and-run missions. Of course, supplies can be transferred not just on roads but in the open field. However, in this time of the year, the weather can seriously hamper movement and maneuver. In this actual situation, the weather was varying on a wide scale. Rain, snow, and below -10 degrees Celsius were coming after one another. All in all, it made the Russian logistics even more difficult, and challenges were not present only in terms of logistics. The layout of forces were not exactly like as it is seen on the map here. Whole brigades and regiments were not present this close to the line of contact. Instead of that, the actual layout of forces looked something like this. Directly at the line of contact, Russian infantry assault groups and Ukrainian infantry squads were facing each other. Behind the Russian infantry assault groups there were the mortars and some other assault groups as part of the standard assault company. On the Ukrainian side, they also had their mortars relatively close to the front line, and they also had infantry fighting vehicles and tanks hidden in the rear, usually used as mobile firing platforms in order to execute very limited counterattacks against an eventual Russian attack. And of course, drones were present on both sides. However, according to openly available Russian sources, the Ukrainians had an advantage in terms of drone over this bulge. Next to the difficult logistical situation, the Russians had another problem: maintaining the operational tempo. Based on the characteristics of the Russian infantry assault group tactics and the laws of tactical level land forces operations, these infantry assault groups suffer 5 to 30% casualties, practically 1 to 4 people per each attack usually. Therefore, sooner or later, the first echelon forces will run out of steam and reinforcements will be badly needed. But in this actual situation, reinforcements could only be sent forward via the above-mentioned strained logistic routes or on foot under the cover of night. Neither methods ensure an elevated operational tempo. The Russian division and combined arms army staffs were well aware of this fact, and they knew that the only solution for this is to further widen the bulge, thus relieving the pressure on the logistic routes and to ensure some freedom of maneuver for their own forces. In the same time, the Ukrainians also realized the seriousness of their situation. The Russians were only 6 kilometers away from the only main supply route to Pokrovsk, and they were only 4 kilometers away from the border of the Zaporizhia region. While the latter has only political importance, the former has the utmost importance in military terms. Hence the initiative was still in the Russians' hand. They continued their attacks throughout the whole front, but in the 3 days between the 25th and 27th of January they could not achieve any results. By the end of these 3 days, the Russians seemingly ran out of steam and the Ukrainians attempted to retain the initiative. Hence the most dangerous point in the front was near Kotlina. They launched a limited counterattack here, south of the railway berm. Here, after a short but intense fire preparation by drones and artillery, one Bradley IFV from the 425th Skala Assault Regiment assaulted the Russian positions in the northern edge of a built-up area. As I said, first the Russian position was saturated by fire, which provided enough cover for the Bradley to advance up close to the objective. Then the infantry dismounted while the Bradley had held the objective under suppressive fire. Only 1 or 2 minutes after the Ukrainian infantry started to dismount, they received incoming fire from the Russian artillery. This incoming fire arrived approximately 30 seconds late. The Ukrainian infantry has just moved away. From this phenomenon, I can deduct that this fire was coming from the artillery support platoon of the Russian infantry assault company, and this reaction time is pretty formidable. But in this case, only 1 grenade had arrived from the Russian side, which means that the artillery piece got silenced by Ukrainian drones or counter-battery fire. Or they just simply ran out of ammo. We don't know for sure, but I think the first option is more possible. Anyway, the Ukrainian mechanized infantry assaulted and captured this Russian position. Even more, they pushed back the Russians here 500 meters wide and almost a kilometer deep. But this minor counterattack seemingly did not hamper the Russians to continue pushing on. Even more so, they tried to retain the initiative from the Ukrainians. After 2 days of bitter fight, they managed to advance a bit north of Kotlina. Furthermore, on the 2nd of February, they attempted to outflank the previous Ukrainian advance and launched an attack along the railway berm. Some months before, the Russians managed to achieve significant successes when they advanced along the railway berm near Ocheretine and Pokrovsk back in summer 2024. But here, a concentrated fire of Ukrainian infantry, drones and artillery had beaten back the Russians. After this engagement, Mainly due to bad weather and the necessity of regrouping on both sides, no military activity happened that is worth to mention. On the 9th of February, the Ukrainians attacked the Dashenka and they managed to push back the Russians to the center of the village. This is an interesting phenomenon because it seems that the Ukrainians tried to copy the Russian balance-shifting attack method. On the 10th of February, the Ukrainians successfully executed a small attack with one mechanized infantry assault squad near Piszczanie. On the 11th, they attacked again here at Piszczanie, and they also advanced near Kotline. In the next 7 days again, nothing happened. This is due to the return of the bad weather, but mainly due to the ongoing titanic battle of the Ulakli Cauldron, which was going on not far from here in this exact time frame. After this week-long pause, the Russians attacked again and they managed to retake some houses in Piszczanie and both in Dashenka. But these were the last Russian successes in this village so far. On the 20th of February, the Ukrainians recaptured Dashenka and they have managed to push back the Russians along a wide front between Dashenka and Lysivka. This is an important tactical victory because it means that here the Ukrainians managed to penetrate the Russian defenses along a water barrier. But 6 days later, the Ukrainians deployed a whole company of the 25th Air Assault Brigade supported with the French artillery of the 155th Brigade. With this force, they managed to isolate the Russians in Kotline and with a decisive nocturnal assault recaptured almost the whole village. The next attack came on the 2nd of March. The Ukrainians finished off the Russian battle positions in the ruined village of Kotline after a brutal hand-to-hand combat. Furthermore, on the 4th of March, the Ukrainians also advanced up to the perimeter of the village of Uspenivka. It seems that this is the truth. The Ukrainians tried to beat the Russians with their own method. Attack along the perimeter of the area of influence of the previous attack, and attack with infantry assault groups. First, they isolate the objective with drones and artillery, and then they send 1 or 2 mechanized infantry squads to assault the objective. The only main difference is in the operational tempo. The Ukrainians operate at approximately twice slower operational tempo. This is mainly because of the less available manpower which they try to preserve. It is clearly seen at the attack of the 25th Air Assault Brigade against Kotline. They put almost a month of effort in planning, training, preparations and rehearsals, and only after everything had been set they launched a nocturnal assault. On the 6th of March, which is the data cutoff date of this video, the initiative was clearly in the Ukrainians' hands. It is remained to be seen whether the Ukrainians are capable of eliminating the Russian village southwest of Pokrovsk if they want to do this at all. My prediction would be that the Russians will try to retain the initiative by attacking at the southern flank of this bulge, or even attacking towards Pokrovsk itself. This latter seems to be a dumb move, but only for the first glance. I suggest to think about the fact that in the times of transparent battlefield, the urban areas can provide the necessary cover for the attacking infantry. So don't be surprised if you see a major Russian effort from the south directly towards Pokrovsk in the coming weeks. All in all, that is what I wanted to say. If you think my job worth it, please give this video a like or subscribe to my channel. If you have anything to add, I am more than happy to see it in the comments. Thank you and see you soon.